It happened in the span of a breath. A voicemail from his sister. He's gone. Just that, nothing more. Ethan stood in the middle of the crowded cafe, heart dropping into a silence so loud it drowned the city's chaos. His father, gone without goodbye, without explanation, without time to make peace. A flash of memories surged like a tide. The laughter they once shared, the last argument, the long silence that followed. His coffee trembled in his hand and then fell, shattering like his insides. Around him people kept talking, laughing, scrolling through their phones. The world hadn't stopped, but his had. The sting wasn't just death, it was the unresolved. The father-shaped hole in his life now echoed louder, deeper. Cafe felt too bright, too alive. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. All he could do was stare ahead, as everything crumbled invisibly inside. Ethan walked the streets like a ghost. His feet moved, but he didn't. Manhattan's thunderous energy crashed all around him. Cars honking, subways rumbling, neon ads flickering. But inside, he was still stuck in that cafe. Every pedestrian that brushed past him felt like a shove from a life that refused to pause. The voicemail played on loop in his mind. He's gone. Just 2 words. No softness. No closure. He tried to remember the last thing he told his father, but nothing came. Blank, dotty. Emptiness. That silence between them was now permanent. His father's voice, once thunderous, now extinct. The pavement blurred beneath his shoes, a smear of gray and memory. Ethan wasn't just grieving death. He was grieving lost words, lost chances. He turned a corner and stopped at a red light, but inside him, the lights were still green, begging him to go back, to make it right. But there was no back anymore. He wandered into Central Park without knowing why. Trees whispered overhead, their leaves brushing each other like they shared secrets he'd never hear. The world had changed overnight. His chest felt too tight for breath, like sorrow had its own gravity. He sat on a damp wooden bench and stared at the lake, its surface still, disinterested in his pain. He wanted the sky to collapse or for some divine sign to scream from the clouds. But nothing happened. Just ducks paddling across like nothing was lost. Ethan thought of the Zen stories his father once told him, riddles cloaked in calmness. He used to roll his eyes at them. Now he clung to them like flotation devices in emotional floodwaters. He muttered one aloud, barely audible. The wind blows, yet the flag moves not. The mind moves. But his mind wasn't moving. It was circling. Trapped. Day. A little girl ran past him chasing pigeons, her laughter cutting through the fog in his mind like a bell. For a split second, he looked up. Her mother trailed behind, smiling gently at her joy. Ethan watched them disappear down the path, and suddenly remembered something ridiculous. His father singing out of tune during Sunday chores, pretending the broom was a guitar. His laugh had been loud, wild, embarrassing. Ethan used to beg him to stop. Now he'd give anything to hear that awful singing again. He stared at his hands and whispered, "I wasn't ready." His voice cracked. A couple walked by holding hands, and he turned his gaze away. The world, it seemed, had no time for grief. It kept going, walking forward. But Ethan stood still, watching time leave him behind. That night, the city lights blurred through Ethan's apartment window as he sat alone, curtains half drawn, surrounded by unopened messages and untouched takeout. He played the voicemail again, this time on speaker. "He's gone." His sister's voice cracked just enough to betray what she tried to hold in. Ethan closed his eyes, let the words settle into the hollows of his body. He needed to scream, but no sound came. Only silence, and the humming refrigerator, the clock ticking like it was mocking him. He pulled out an old photo album. There it was, his father holding baby Ethan in a hospital chair, face lit with tired joy. He hadn't seen that photo in years. A lump rose in his throat. "You were always louder than life," he whispered to the photograph. "Why did you leave in silence?" The following morning came without permission. Ethan hadn't slept, just drifted in and out of a haunted stillness. Wow! As dawn crept in through half-closed blinds, it painted pale streaks across his father's unopened letter sitting on the kitchen table. It had arrived a week ago. Handwritten. No return address. Ethan had tossed it aside. He wasn't ready then. He wasn't ready now. But the silence in his apartment had changed. It had become oppressive, pushing him towards something. He sat before it, staring, breath shallow. His fingers hesitated at the envelope's edge, as if it were made of glass. What if it was a confession? An apology? Or worse, nothing at all. Just more mystery. He didn't want more mystery. He wanted clarity, forgiveness, something real. Still, with trembling hands, he began to open it, the paper whispering like breath through a prayer. The letter began without preamble. If you're reading this, I'm already gone. Ethan's breath caught. The words were raw, unedited, bleeding emotion between the lines. His father's handwriting was uneven, like his thoughts were sprinting faster than the pen. I didn't know how to speak to you, not after all that's happened. But I never stopped watching over you, even when I was the ghost in your life. Ethan read on, fingers tightening. You hated me for leaving. And you were right to. But I left because I thought I was poison. I thought distance would protect you from me. The pain in those lines was unmistakable. It wasn't a letter. It was a mirror, and Ethan wasn't sure he liked what it reflected. He blinked away tears, the paper shaking in his hands. Outside, the city moved on, unaware that a man was breaking open. Ethan stood at the window, holding the letter like it might vanish. I saw your first piano recital, it said. I stood at the back, too ashamed to show my face. Ethan's voice cracked as he read aloud. You played like your soul had something to say. That line hit him hard. He remembered that night. The empty chair in the front row. The hurt. Died. He never knew his father was there. And yet, he had felt something. A presence. A warmth in the shadows he couldn't explain. His father had been the ghost hiding in his victories, the shadow behind his triumphs. It wasn't abandonment. It was broken love, fumbling through guilt. Ethan pressed the letter to his chest, eyes wet, heart louder than the traffic below. He placed the letter back in its envelope and slid it into the drawer, not as an escape, but as a ritual. He wasn't ready to understand all of it yet, but he knew he had to carry it with him, not bury it. The phone buzzed. A text from his sister, memorials today, noon .2. He had forgotten. Or maybe he had avoided remembering. A wave of nausea swelled in his gut. He didn't want to go. He didn't want the pitying glances, the whispered condolences. But, somewhere deep in the marrow of his grief, a voice whispered, show up, even if it hurts. He took a long breath, stood, and walked to the bathroom. The mirror showed a man tired and cracked, but standing. Let's go say goodbye, he said quietly to his reflection. The small memorial was held in a quiet community chapel, old wooden pews lined with strangers and familiar faces wearing black. Ethan entered last, shoulders slightly hunched, as if the grief had weight. His sister looked at him and gave a small broken smile. He nodded. No words exchanged. The room was filled with silent echoes, unspoken apologies, untold stories. A photograph of their father rested on the altar, smiling, eyes bright, younger than Ethan remembered. A pastor spoke, but Ethan barely heard him. He stared at the photo, letting memories fill in the silence. At one point, his sister leaned over and whispered, "He always loved your music." Ethan's lips parted in a fragile smile. Grief, it seemed, didn't just break things. Sometimes it stitched them back, slowly, painfully. Days passed like slow-moving clouds, quiet, heavy, and shapeless. Ethan returned to his life, but something in him no longer fit. At work he stared at screens without seeing. At night he sat with a guitar he hadn't touched in months, fingers frozen over the strings. Everything felt distant. Then one evening, frustration overtook him. He slammed the guitar down and yelled into the emptiness, "What do you want from me?" The question wasn't for anyone living. It echoed off the walls, met only with silence. The grief was no longer a sharp wound. It was a dull roar inside him, demanding answers no one could give. He had forgiven his father. Maybe. But he hadn't forgiven himself. For waiting too long. For never reaching out. For letting pride rot what little bridge remained. The guilt was louder than the grief. And it was eating him alive. The next morning, he stood in front of his father's old storage unit. Keys jingled in his hand, the metal cold with memory. His sister had given them to him days ago, and now he finally came. The rusted door creaked open like a sigh. Dust motes floated in the air like forgotten ghosts. Inside, boxes towered in uneven rows. Old clothes, journals, faded photographs. Ethan hesitated before stepping in. Each box felt like a landmine, each label a whisper from the past. He opened one and found a notebook. On the first page in his father's handwriting, "Forgiveness is not a door you walk through. It's one you build, piece by piece." Ethan sat on the concrete floor, notebook in lap, suddenly unsure if this visit was to mourn, or to meet the man he never truly knew. He spent hours there, uncovering his father piece by piece. Photos from protests in the 70s, love letters never sent. Clippings of Ethan's early concerts with tiny pencil marks in the corners. A father who had been proud in silence, who had built shrines in shadow. And beneath it all, journal entries, raw and bleeding with regret. Missed his birthday again, watched from the car. He's taller now. Ethan wept. Not for the loss, but for the proof that love had existed quietly, stubbornly, and imperfectly. They had been two broken men, trying to protect each other by staying apart. How many stories go untold because pride ties the tongue? Ethan ran his fingers down a photo of him and his dad fishing, both of them mid-laugh. And for the first time, he allowed the memory to make him smile. That night, Ethan returned home with a box under one arm. Inside were the things that mattered. The photo, the notebook, a cassette tape, labeled "just in case." He didn't have a cassette player. But somehow, just holding it made him feel tethered. He placed it on his bookshelf like an artifact of possibility. Later, he stood by his window, watching the city breathe. Lights flickered. Horns blared. Life carried on. And yet he felt strangely still, anchored not by answers but by acceptance. He whispered, "You did the best you could, didn't you?" The words tasted unfamiliar but right. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. The pain hadn't left, but its shape had changed. It no longer clawed, it pressed, gently, like a presence reminding him he had more to learn. Ethan sat in his kitchen, brewing tea just like his father used to, loose leaves, steeped long, no sugar. As the kettle hissed, he looked out at the fire escape and thought about legacy. Not in grand gestures, but in the small rituals we inherit. He took a sip and closed his eyes. The taste was bitter, earthy, grounding. It made him smile. He didn't need to become his father. He didn't need to forgive everything or even understand it all. He just had to keep going, to keep showing up for himself. That was his healing. That was trust. He opened his laptop and began typing a letter, not for anyone else, but for himself. A story maybe. Or a beginning. His fingers paused above the keys, then moved slowly. Once, there was a man who lost his father but found him anyway. A week later, Ethan visited his mother's home, a quiet brick house just outside the city. He hadn't told her he was coming. Something about the past few days had pulled him back here, to the house of half-truths and long silences. She opened the door with surprise and a guarded smile. "You look tired," she said softly. "I am," he replied. The air inside smelled of lavender and thyme. As they sat at the kitchen table, he finally asked the question that had haunted him. Why did Dad leave? His mother hesitated, her eyes glassing over. "He didn't want to," she said. "But he was sick, not just in the body, in the mind." Ethan's breath caught. She continued, "He didn't want to hurt you. He thought disappearing was safer." The room felt smaller now. The story he had lived was suddenly different. Not abandonment. Not cruelty. Fear. Brokenness. She rose from the table and walked slowly to a drawer, retrieving a worn file folder. "He asked me to hold on to this," she said, placing it in front of Ethan. Inside were medical reports, therapy notes, and a handwritten letter titled, "For When He's Ready." Ethan unfolded it with trembling hands. "I saw the darkness coming," it began, "and I was too ashamed to bring it home." Each line painted a portrait of a man losing pieces of himself, terrified of hurting the people he loved. Ethan's chest ached. All these years he had seen his father as a deserter. But now the truth rewrote the pain. His father hadn't run from love. He had run from the fear of becoming someone he couldn't control. "He was trying to protect us," Ethan whispered. His mother nodded. And it broke him. Later that evening, Ethan wandered through his childhood bedroom. The posters were gone, but the old wooden dresser still stood, etched with initials and stickers long faded. He opened a drawer and found a shoebox. Inside, cassette tapes, a broken watch, a Zen book with underlined passages. One note in the margin read, "Truth isn't spoken, it's revealed in silence." Ethan sat on the floor, the book in his lap, as the quiet enveloped him. The same silence he had once cursed now felt like an old friend, offering not answers, but space. Space to breathe. Space to feel. His entire life he had run from silence, filling it with noise, work, anger. But his father had been trying to teach him, without words, that sometimes trust begins in the stillness. Outside, the sky was turning indigo. Ethan stepped onto the porch, carrying the Zen book. Crickets sang their twilight song. He sat on the old wooden steps and opened the book to the marked page. The flag moves. The wind moves. The mind moves. His father had written beneath it, "But peace is still." Ethan closed his eyes. The chaos within him didn't vanish, but something softened. It was the first time he didn't feel like fighting his grief. He let it be. Let it breathe. Let it sit beside him like an old companion. In that moment, Ethan understood. Healing didn't mean erasing pain. It meant witnessing it, without flinching. He looked up at the night sky, stars emerging one by one, and whispered, "I see you now." It wasn't just to the sky. It was to the man he once hated, and to the man he was becoming. That night, back in his apartment, Ethan played the cassette. He had found an old player in his mother's attic. The tape hissed softly before a voice crackled through. His father's voice, slow and weathered. "If you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it back in time. I just wanted you to know. I always saw you. Even when I couldn't be there. You were never alone, Ethan. Not once." Ethan sat still, hands trembling, tears flooding silently. "I hope you'll forgive me, and I hope you'll live a life fuller than mine. A life led by trust, not fear." Then silence. Ethan pressed rewind, played it again, and again. Each time, the voice felt less like an echo, and more like a heartbeat. He didn't just hear the words, he believed them. Finally, Ethan returned to the bench in Central Park, the same one where he had once sat paralyzed by loss. But now, the silence felt different. Less suffocating. More sacred. In his hands he held the notebook his father had written in. He opened it to a blank page and began writing. Not a journal. Not a letter. Just thoughts. Truths. Confessions. "And you. I didn't know how to love you while you were alive," he wrote. "But I think I'm learning now." Each word felt like a bridge being rebuilt, each line a thread pulling him back into the present. Around him the world buzzed with quiet motion, leaves rustling, people walking dogs, distant laughter. But inside him, there was stillness. This wasn't peace, not yet. But it was clarity. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't trying to run. He was staying. He kept coming back. Every day for a week. Same bench, same notebook, different thoughts. Some days, he wrote long reflections. Other days, just a single sentence. One day, he wrote nothing at all, only sat, breathing, existing. On the seventh day, he closed the notebook and said aloud, "It's time." Not to move on, but to move forward. He had spent so long trying to fix the past, stitch together what had unraveled. But healing, he realized, wasn't backward work. It was forward trust. Trust that broken things could still hold light. Trust that he didn't need all the answers to keep living. Trust in the invisible rhythm of the universe, always shifting, always listening. He stood, stretched, and turned toward the exit path. He didn't look back. Back at his apartment, Ethan rearranged his space. He cleared cluttered shelves, boxed old documents, gave away what no longer served him. On the windowsill, he placed the photo of his father holding him as a baby, no longer hidden in a drawer, but facing the light. He brewed tea, the same bitter blend, and played the cassette one last time. This time he didn't cry. He listened. Listened like it was music, like it was memory woven into melody. Then, without ceremony, he turned off the player and smiled. Not because he had found peace, but because he was no longer afraid of its absence. The transformation wasn't thunderous. It was quiet, like breath returning after long absence. He didn't need to become someone else. He only needed to return to himself. That night, a dream visited him. He stood on a cliff overlooking a vast ocean. The sky was heavy with stars. And beside him stood his father. Not younger, not older, just present. Neither of them spoke. They simply stood there, breathing in the salt air, side by side. Then his father turned and said, "You're not lost. You just stopped listening." Ethan woke with tears on his pillow, and the image of that ocean still alive in his mind. He didn't question the dream, didn't analyze it. Some truths didn't need translation. Some moments were simply gifts. He walked to the window, still barefoot, and watched the first light of dawn arrive. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like another day to survive. It felt like an invitation. In the following days, Ethan began teaching again. Small community music classes in the evenings. His students ranged from shy teens to curious elders. Each lesson wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. "Play like you mean it," he told them, "even if it's messy." And as they played, out of tune, full of heart, he felt something blossom. Not joy, not yet, but a kind of purpose. A thread pulling him gently towards something bigger. One evening, after class, a young student stayed behind. "Why do you smile when we mess up?" she asked. Ethan laughed. "Because it means you're brave enough to keep going." She nodded thoughtfully. And in that small moment, Ethan saw a reflection of himself, learning to trust again, note by note, mistake by mistake. And maybe that was the most sacred music of all. The season shifted. Leaves crisped and fell like burnt paper. Ethan walked the familiar path through the park, the bench now just a stop, not a destination. He noticed more now, the chatter of birds, the way wind wove through tree limbs, the quiet courage of people simply existing. One morning, he found himself smiling at a stranger. Just a nod, a shared pause. It meant nothing. It meant everything. He had learned that healing didn't announce itself. It whispered through daily things. The absence still lived in him, but it no longer ruled him. In stillness, he heard life. In grief, he found a rhythm. In uncertainty, he found breath. As he walked, he placed one hand over his heart and whispered, "I'm still here." Not as a question, but as a vow. That afternoon, Ethan sat at a sidewalk cafe, watching the world pass. Across the street, a father knelt to tie his daughter's shoe, laughing. Ethan didn't look away. He used to flinch at those moments, but now he let them in. The joy of others didn't diminish his sorrow. It reminded him he could feel again. He pulled out his notebook, scribbled a line. Grief is love with nowhere to go, but sometimes it finds a way back. A woman at the next table glanced over and smiled. "Writer?" she asked. "Trying to be," he replied. They shared a soft laugh. It wasn't flirtation. It wasn't anything big. Just human warmth. He liked that. Not everything had to be a turning point. Sometimes it was enough to be seen. One evening, Ethan finally visited his father's grave. He brought no flowers, just the cassette tape. He placed it on the headstone gently, like a shared relic. The cemetery was quiet, just the rustle of wind and distant city. "I hated you," Ethan said plainly. "But I loved you too. And I think I finally understand why both can be true." He sat cross-legged in the grass. No tears. Just breath. "You broke me open, but maybe that's how the light got in." The words weren't rehearsed. They spilled like rain. "I forgive you," he said. "And I forgive myself." The wind carried a sudden gust through the trees. Leaves scattered. Ethan smiled. It wasn't a sign. But it was enough. That night, he walked away without looking back. In a moment of impulse, Ethan returned to the concert hall he had avoided for years. The seats were empty, the air thick with silence and dust. He stepped onto the stage alone, guitar slung over his back. No one watching. No one listening. Perfect. He sat on the stool, adjusted the mic, and let his fingers find their way. The first note trembled, then steadied, then flowed. He played not to perform, but to feel. The sound echoed gently off the empty walls like memory. In that space his father's absence didn't haunt, it harmonized. Ethan played until his hands ached, eyes closed, mouth whispering old Zen phrases between notes. No path, no destination, only this. He finished the final chord, let it ring out, and let the silence swallow it whole. As winter crept in, Ethan lit a candle in his apartment each night. No reason. Just ritual. A quiet honoring of everything unsaid. One evening, he sat by the window, city lights flickering below, candle flames steady beside him. He thought about trust, not as belief in outcomes, but as surrender to presence. To show up with nothing but breath. That was enough. He wrote one last line in his notebook. "I don't need the universe to explain itself. I just need to listen when it speaks." Then he closed the book, blew out the candle, and let the darkness hold him. Not with fear, but with reverence. He was no longer running, no longer reaching. He was simply being. And that was the most radical act of all. The first snow fell quietly. Ethan stood at his apartment window, watching flakes spiral down like tiny dancers. The city below slowed, softened. There was something sacred about this kind of stillness, the kind that asked nothing, expected nothing. He sipped his tea and thought about the spaces grief had carved in him, the echoes it left behind. But now, those echoes made room for something else. Wonder. He thought about how trust wasn't something to build. It was something to allow. Like snow falling, effortless, natural, inevitable. Somewhere deep within he realized he didn't need to understand everything. He only needed to stay open. That was enough. As the flakes thickened outside, Ethan whispered, "I'm ready for whatever comes." And this time he meant it. He walked to the river the next day, where ice crusted the edges and the water flowed slow but steady. The wind stung his cheeks, but he welcomed it. With him he carried nothing. No notebook, no phone, no relics of memory. Just presence. Standing at the bank, he took in the rhythm of the current. He remembered his father's Zen riddle. When the river flows, does it sing, or does it listen? For the first time, Ethan didn't try to solve it. He just stood there, eyes open, heart open, letting the world move through him. He didn't need a path forward. This moment, alive, sacred, and unscripted, was enough. He let out a slow breath, watching it cloud the air, and felt it dissolve like doubt. A breath in, a breath out. Everything he needed was already here. Later that week, Ethan visited the community center alone. No teaching, no music, just silence. The piano room was empty. He sat at the bench, fingers hovering over the keys, then began to play, not a song but sounds, scattered like thoughts. No rhythm, no plan, just surrender. Each note was its own prayer, rising and fading, raw and imperfect. He closed his eyes and let his soul pour through his hands. If someone had heard, they might have called it chaos. But for Ethan, it was clarity. The kind that doesn't come from control, but from release. He didn't play to remember or to forget. He played to be. The final note rang out, thin and fragile, then disappeared into stillness. And in that stillness, Ethan smiled, not for the past, but for the truth that lived after it. On a snowy morning, Ethan visited the hill where he used to sled as a child. The neighborhood was still, muffled by snowfall. He stood at the top, hands in his coat, looking out across the landscape, white, wide, and full of quiet promise. He knelt down, picked up a handful of snow, and smiled. There was no monument to his father here, no sacred shrine, but in the air, the breath, the stillness, he felt him, not as a ghost, but as a rhythm, a part of the unfolding. Ethan whispered, "Thank you," not knowing to whom. Maybe to life, maybe to grief, maybe to the version of himself that had chosen to stay. And in that moment, the silence around him didn't feel empty. It felt whole. That evening, Ethan lit one final candle. No ritual, no story, just presence. He opened the window and let the cold air rush in. Outside, the world turned quietly. He didn't try to name the feeling inside him. It was too big, too subtle, too sacred. He sat with it. No striving, no expectation. The universe had not given him clarity in the way he wanted, but it had given him something better, a path into himself. And on that path he had found not answers, but peace with the questions. As the candle flickered low, Ethan whispered one last truth, meant only for the stars. "The universe doesn't need to be trusted," he said. "It already is." And in that breath, in that moment, he became part of it.